Behind the door of an ordinary-looking house, a secret slowly gnawed at a family. The passing of a father reopened wounds that had never truly healed. Words turned into weapons, glances into accusations, and love quietly shifted into calculation. Every step brought them closer to something they had never imagined. This story is not merely about wealth, but about choices, the silent ones that shape destiny. Before we get into the story, don't forget to say hi in the comments and tell us where you're watching from. And make sure to hit the subscribe button on Stories with Meaning channel so you won't miss our next compelling story. That morning, an old house at the edge of a small town still stood as it always had. Its paint had faded, its door creaked with every movement, yet the scent of memories lingered in every corner. It was there that Mr. Harold Whitmore had raised his family, a simple man who believed that hard work and prayer were the most valuable inheritance he could leave behind. Harold passed away peacefully. He left no lengthy message, no complicated written will, only a house, a piece of land, and the belief that his children would take care of their mother. His wife, Eleanor Whitmore, had hair that had long turned silver and a back slightly bent by time, yet her eyes still held the same warmth they had decades ago. Every dawn she would wake early, perform her quiet prayers, and whisper to God, hoping her family would remain united even after her husband's passing. Their 3 children gathered in the house. The eldest, Victor Whitmore, was well established, always dressed sharply. His voice was firm, cold, and authoritative. From the beginning, he believed he was the most entitled to take control. The second, Adrian Whitmore, carried a gentle smile and spoke with politeness, but his eyes were always calculating. He was skilled at hiding intentions behind courteous words. The youngest, Nolan Whitmore, lived a modest life. He rarely spoke, often lowering his gaze, yet his heart carried old wounds that had never healed. In the early days after the funeral, everything was wrapped in a thin layer of pretense. They ate together, sat at the same table. Eleanor prepared warm tea just like she always had. "We must take care of each other. Your father would want us to stay united," she said softly. Victor nodded briefly. "Yes, Mom. We'll discuss everything calmly." Adrian smiled. "Don't worry, Mom. Everything will be fair." Nolan only nodded silently, but the silence was not sincere. Behind the smiles and nods, their thoughts had already begun drifting in different directions. The house was too valuable, the land too tempting, and Harold's death had opened a door that long had been locked. That night, after Eleanor had fallen asleep, Victor stood in the living room staring at the walls as if measuring the price of memories. "This house can't just be left like this," he said flatly. Adrian replied softly yet sharply, "What matters is that no one feels more entitled than they should, especially if they've never really contributed." Nolan remained silent, his hands clenched beneath the table. The words felt like small knives slowly piercing his chest. Eleanor heard none of it. She slept peacefully, believing her children were still the same ones she had once protected from rain and hunger. She didn't know that night was the last time peace would live in her home. On the 7th day after the funeral, the house felt different. The air was the same, the walls unchanged, but the atmosphere had turned cold. Eleanor sensed it from the morning. She cooked rice longer than usual, not because she forgot, but because her thoughts were disturbed by the dishonest looks in her children's eyes. Victor sat in the living room holding documents, copies of property certificates. He arranged them neatly like a chairman preparing for a hearing. "Dad is gone. We can't go on like this," he said. Adrian crossed his legs, a faint but meaningful smile. "Exactly. Because he's gone, we need to act quickly and clearly. We don't want problems later." Nolan finally spoke, his voice low. "Fast or not doesn't matter. What matters is fairness." Victor turned sharply. "Fair according to who? You?" The words fell like a hammer. Eleanor, who had just stepped out of the kitchen, froze at the doorway. "Take it easy. Don't talk like that," she said gently. But Victor didn't even look at her. "Mom, this is an adult matter. You don't need to get too involved." Those words cut deeper than a shout. For the first time, Eleanor felt she no longer had a place in discussions about the home she had cared for her entire life. Adrian added, his tone smooth but poisonous, "Don't worry, Mom. We just want everything to be clear so no one feels disadvantaged, especially those who've just been living off others." Nolan stood up. "What do you mean by that?" Adrian smiled faintly. "You know your situation. Don't expect more than you're capable of." Eleanor clutched her chest, her breathing heavy. "That's enough. Don't hurt each other. Wealth won't bring blessings if it's handled like this." Victor exhaled harshly. "Blessings don't pay the bills." Silence followed. Only the ticking of the wall clock echoed, counting down the patients left in the room. From that day, conversations became stiff. They no longer ate together. Each carried their own plate, sitting apart. Suspicion filled their gazes. Whispers slipped behind closed doors. Eleanor often sat alone in her room, staring at Harold's photograph. "Why are they like this?" she whispered, her eyes wet. Outside, Victor was on the phone discussing a lawyer. Adrian recalculated potential shares. Nolan stared at the evening sky, feeling the house growing smaller and colder. The tension had not yet exploded, but the cracks were undeniable. And deep down, everyone knew something worse was waiting. Days passed heavily. The house was no longer a place to return to. It had become a place to endure. One afternoon, Victor brought a well-dressed man into the house. "This is Mr. Donovan, our attorney," he said briefly. Eleanor was startled. "Why are you in such a hurry?" "Because if we delay, the problem will only grow," Victor replied without looking at her. Adrian opened a brown folder. "We have to be realistic, Mom. Not everything can be based on feelings." Nolan, who had just returned from work, stood near the door. "Why not talk things through properly first?" Victor smirked. "What does properly mean to you? Waiting while Mom cries every day?" Eleanor flinched. "I never asked for anything." Adrian responded quietly, yet sharply. "That's the problem, Mom. You're too weak. The world doesn't run on tears." Mr. Donovan looked uncomfortable. "I'm just here to assist. The decision is yours as a family." Victor nodded. The house should be sold, the land divided, everything settled. Nolan stepped forward. "This is Mom's home. Dad's memory is here." Victor laughed shortly. "Memories don't feed you." Adrian pressed further. "You talk like you're the most devoted, but who's been asking for help all this time?" That hit Nolan hard. "So kindness is just a debt to you?" Eleanor held Nolan's arm. "Please, don't fight." But Victor stood. "This has to be done now. No more drama later. Mom, be honest. You're old. You can't manage all this. It's better if you live with one of us." Eleanor looked at him for a long time. "This house is my life." Adrian smiled coldly. "Your life is over, Mom. Now it's our turn." The room froze. Nolan clenched his fists. "Don't talk like that." Victor stepped closer. "What do you want? To block everything because you're afraid of getting less?" Nolan pushed his chair back. "If this is how it's done, I want no part of it." Victor replied instantly. "Fine, but don't claim anything later." That night, Eleanor cried alone in her room. She prayed for a long time, whispering God's name with trembling lips. "If this is a test, give me strength." Outside, Victor and Adrian spoke quietly. "If Nolan leaves, our shares will be bigger," Adrian whispered. Victor nodded. "Let him go. Mom will give in eventually." From behind the door, Nolan heard part of that conversation, and in that moment, something inside him broke completely. His chest tightened. Nolan realized this conflict was no longer about inheritance. It was about who would be cast aside first. And from that night on, the path toward destruction became painfully clear. That morning, rain fell softly, yet inside Harold Whitmore's house, the air felt suffocatingly hot, heavy with tension, as if the walls themselves were holding back anger ready to collapse. Eleanor Whitmore sat on a wooden chair near the window, staring blankly at the rain-soaked yard. In her hands was a small bag filled with old letters, something she had never shown anyone. Victor stood in the middle of the living room. "The attorney is coming again tomorrow. We settle everything," he said firmly. Adrian leaned against the wall. "The sooner the better. I'm tired of living in a house full of sour faces." Nolan stepped in from the kitchen, his face exhausted, eyes red. "Do you even have a heart?" Victor glanced at him with disdain. "A heart doesn't make you rich." Nolan stepped closer. "This isn't about money. This is about Mom." Adrian let out a short laugh. "Mom? You hide behind her because you have nothing." Eleanor slowly stood. "Stop!" But her voice drowned in the rising anger. Victor approached her. "Mom, be realistic. Do you want to live depending on others until you die?" That sentence snapped something inside Nolan. "Take that back!" Victor didn't flinch. "If you don't like it, leave. You're nothing in this house." Adrian added coldly, "You've always been a burden. Now suddenly you're the defender?" Eleanor covered her mouth as tears fell silently. "Why have you all changed like this?" Victor answered flatly, "We haven't changed. We're just being honest now." Nolan looked at his mother. "Mom, let's just leave." Victor burst out laughing. "Go where? With what? Don't drag her into your miserable life." Those words lashed like a whip. Eleanor trembled. "I don't need anything. I just want to be respected." Adrian stepped closer. "Respect doesn't come from age. It comes from position." Silence filled the room. Only the rain spoke. Eleanor took a long breath, her voice barely audible. "Then I know what I must do." Victor frowned. "What do you mean?" But she didn't answer. She walked slowly to her room and closed the door gently. Behind it, her tears finally broke free. Not loud, but the quiet cry of someone who had fought too long and finally surrendered. That night changed everything. In the living room, Adrian whispered, "See, she's finally quiet." Nolan stood frozen, his chest aching. Something had broken that day. Not just their relationship, but the sense of home itself. Night fell. Inside her room, Eleanor stared at her small bag. Her eyes were empty, but her decision was final. And without anyone realizing it, that night became the beginning of a separation that could never be repaired. Morning came in silence. The sun rose pale behind the clouds, as if hesitant to touch a house filled with wounds. Eleanor woke up earlier than usual. Inside her bag, simple clothes, medicine, and the house key she had held for years. She walked quietly to the kitchen. No one was awake. Victor and Adrian were still asleep. Nolan lay curled up in the living room like an exhausted child. Eleanor paused, looking at his face. Her hands trembled, but she held herself back from waking him. Instead, she wrote a letter in unsteady handwriting. "I am not leaving out of hate. I am leaving because I cannot stay in a home that has lost its love. Take care of yourselves."
She placed the letter on the dining table, the very place where they used to argue. Then she opened the front door. The morning air greeted her face, and without looking back, she walked away. By noon, Victor noticed. "Mom?" he called briefly. No answer. Adrian walked out yawning, probably in the kitchen. Minutes later, they found the letter. Victor read it quickly and tossed it onto the table. "Drama," he muttered. Adrian chuckled. "She'll come back. She has nowhere else to go." Nolan, who had just woken, read it with trembling hands. His face turned pale. "Mom left." Victor shrugged. "Her choice." Days passed. Eleanor never returned. No calls, no messages. The house felt bigger, but emptier. The dining table was no longer used together. The kitchen grew cold. Morning prayers were no longer heard. Victor began coming home late. The house he had taken over now felt hollow. Adrian busied himself dividing assets, yet every night his sleep was restless. Nolan sat alone on the porch, staring at the road, hoping. One afternoon, news came from a distant relative. Eleanor was sick, living alone in a small house far away. Victor stayed silent. "Let her be," he finally said. Adrian nodded. "We can't delay things anymore." Nolan stood, trembling. "You've gone too far." But no one listened. That night, rain poured heavily. Nolan sat alone, gripping his mother's worn letter. At the same time, Victor signed the inheritance documents. Adrian calculated his share with a faint smile. None of them realized their downfall had already begun. Not suddenly, but like poison, slow, certain, and destructive. After Eleanor left, Nolan's days became a relentless search. He abandoned the house without looking back. He searched every corner of the city, visited distant relatives, even went to a small church she once visited. "Have you seen an elderly woman named Eleanor?" he asked repeatedly. Most shook their heads. Some answered with pity. "Maybe, a while ago." Nolan spent his nights in a cramped rented room, leaning against the wall, staring at his mother's photo. "God, don't let me be too late," he whispered. Meanwhile, Victor lived in the large house, now entirely his. He bought new furniture, repainted the walls, erased the past. Yet every change made the house feel colder. It no longer felt like home, just an empty structure echoing with regret. Adrian was no different. He held his inheritance money with a smile that never felt complete, jumping from one pleasure to another, chasing satisfaction that always slipped away. His laughter felt forced. His nights were restless. Deep inside them both, something stirred, a quiet unease, a hollow space nothing could fill. Their mother's name began to appear in their thoughts, uninvited, persistent, like a shadow. Nolan grew more desperate. The trail grew colder. His body was exhausted, but he kept walking. One evening, he sat at a bus stop. Rain fell suddenly, and there in the rain, Nolan cried. Not loudly, but the quiet cry of someone afraid of losing forever. At that same moment, Victor stood on his porch, staring at the same rain, surrounded by wealth, yet completely alone. "Why doesn't this feel like a victory?" he whispered. Adrian stared at his phone. His fingers trembled as he typed, then erased. "What's the point?" he muttered. No one knew where Eleanor Whitmore was, but one thing was certain. While Nolan was losing everything searching for his mother, Victor and Adrian were slowly losing themselves. That morning, Nolan walked towards the cemetery with heavy steps. After days of searching without results, his chest felt empty. He carried a simple bouquet, seeking peace at his father's grave. Harold Whitmore had always been his place to confide, even now, only through prayer. The sky was gray. The wind moved gently between the gravestones. But as Nolan approached the family plot, he suddenly stopped. In the distance, he saw a crowd gathering.
Several cemetery caretakers stood tensely nearby. Neighbors whispered among themselves, their faces pale. Something was wrong. This was too crowded for a simple visit. Nolan's heart pounded violently. He quickened his steps, his vision blurring with a fear he couldn't explain. And then he saw it. In front of Harold Whitmore's grave lay the body of an elderly woman. Her body was stiff, her arms wrapped tightly around the gravestone, as if refusing to let go. Her face was pale, but unmistakable. "Mom!" Nolan screamed. He ran forward and collapsed to his knees beside Eleanor's body. Her skin was cold, her eyes closed, her forehead rested against Harold's gravestone, as if she had come home, not just to visit, but to stay. A caretaker tried to hold Nolan back. "Please, we found her this morning." Nolan shook his mother's body, trembling. "Mom, wake up! I'm here!" No answer. Only the wind moved softly through the quiet prayers of the onlookers. One of the locals whispered, "She must have come here last night, sat here for a long time." In Eleanor's hand, they found the old house key, a key that no longer opened any door, except memories. Nolan held his mother's body, crying in silence. His chest felt shattered. He understood now. She hadn't returned to the house. She had returned to her husband. The news spread quickly. Victor received the call while sitting in the living room of the large house. His phone slipped from his hand. He stood frozen, unable to breathe. "That's impossible," he whispered. Adrian read the same message in his luxury car. His hands trembled. The smile he had forced for so long collapsed instantly. They both rushed to the cemetery, but when they arrived, all they saw was Nolan kneeling in the wet soil. Their mother's body was already covered in a white cloth. No words came out. No amount of wealth could replace what they were seeing. And between Harold Whitmore's grave, soaked in rain and tears, truth stood there, brutally clear. When they finally wanted to go home, there was no longer a mother waiting. Eleanor Whitmore's funeral passed in heavy silence. Soil was poured slowly. Prayers were spoken in trembling voices. Nolan stood closest to the grave, his face pale, his eyes dry, because there were no tears left. Victor and Adrian stood a few steps behind, unable to come closer, like strangers at their own mother's burial. When the crowd began to leave, the tension that had long been buried finally exploded. Victor broke the silence. "If you hadn't taken Mom away, none of this would have happened." Nolan turned sharply. "You drove her away with your words." Adrian snapped, his voice rising. "Don't shift the blame. She left because she couldn't stand both of you." Nolan let out a bitter laugh. "Both of us? She died holding Dad's grave. That's what you call drama?" Victor stepped closer, his face flushed. "You act like the most devoted one, but you didn't find her in time either." That was the spark. "If you had even a little heart, she wouldn't have died alone," Nolan shouted, his voice shaking. Adrian looked at the gravestone, then turned away. "We're all wrong, but don't make it seem like I'm the worst." No one backed down. Every word became a weapon. Every sentence opened another wound. Right there, in front of their mother's fresh grave, they fought like strangers. Finally, Nolan spoke, low but sharp. "From today on, I have no brothers." Victor froze. Adrian swallowed hard. Those words hurt more than any scream. They parted at the cemetery gate. No goodbye, no embrace, no promise. The days that followed became a silent punishment. Victor lived in the large house that now felt suffocating. Every corner reminded him of his mother.
He fell ill often, his sleep restless. The house became an expensive prison. Adrian took his money and left, but wherever he went, guilt followed. His relationships fell apart one by one. When he got sick, no one came. Nolan lived simply. The wound in his heart never fully healed, but he carried his mother's prayers wherever he went. He wasn't rich, he had no power, but every night he could sleep without running from himself. Their brotherhood never returned. The inheritance was divided, but the consequences stayed for life. And between the graves of Harold Whitmore and Eleanor, truth stood in silence. Wealth taken without compassion leaves behind a far crueler emptiness. Time did not heal them. It only made the wounds clearer. Victor declined further. His business weakened. His decisions fell apart. Every morning he woke with a heavy chest, haunted by his mother's face. The house stood tall, but no longer felt like it belonged to anyone. Each night he sat alone, staring at the front door, hoping something would open. But only silence came. Adrian fared no better. His inheritance slowly vanished. Bad choices, wrong people. He mistook freedom for something money could buy. When everyone left him, he realized too late he had cut the strongest bond in his life. He tried reaching out to Victor, but they never truly reconnected. Their relationship died without announcement. At night, he often woke up gasping, always remembering one thing: the old house key in his mother's hand, a symbol he understood far too late. Nolan lived the quietest life, but the most honest one. He never went back to his brothers. He worked modestly, lived simply, but held on to one thing: prayers for his parents. Every Friday, he visited their graves, cleaning the stones, placing flowers, sitting in silence. "Rest now, Mom. I'm not angry anymore," he whispered. Years passed. No reunion, no final embrace. Their bond didn't end because of death, but because of choice. The choice to value wealth over love. The choice to win alone and lose together. This is the true ending. No sudden punishment, no miracle reunion. Only lives moving forward, each carrying their own invisible burden. Dear listeners, many families are not destroyed by lack, but by forgetting gratitude. Inheritance is rarely about what parents leave behind, but about who we become after they're gone. When respect disappears, wealth becomes the most destructive weapon. Siblings cannot be replaced. Parents are not lessons you can repeat after they're gone. If today you still have a mother who prays for you, a sibling who waits for you, don't trade them for numbers and documents. This story ends here, not with victory, but with consequences. If this story touched your heart, made you reflect, or changed the way you see family, leave a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and support more meaningful stories by subscribing. Because stories may end, but life lessons must go on.